my whole life. I'm giving thanks to the Most High, 'cause I could have been anything, dead or in jail or addicted to heroin. 'Cause this world is a scary place, where they teach us how to hate the people that we don't know, but they don't know that we all came from one soul. Okay, I'm not what they show, a terrorist, nor am I a criminal. You can blame a scapegoat, but I pray for peace and not war. I said I'm not what they show, a terrorist, nor am I a criminal. You can blame a scapegoat, but I pray for peace and not war. Rise up. I'm gonna make a difference. Take back what's mine. Give power to the people. Some dreams never die. Can I get a witness? You know that it's right. 'Cause we gotta rise up and teach the world to unite. This is for the haters and the dictators and the debaters, 'cause the love's greater than the bomb. Keep calm, got the world in my palm. Fams from Somalia to Vietnam. 'Cause this blood that flows through my veins is the same, so I can't look the other way. So put down the guns, 'cause to save one life is to save everyone, every son, every mom. Feeling your pain, 'cause this ummah is one. They taking our lives, but they're wrong, 'cause to the Lord of the worlds we belong. So we gotta wake up and sound the alarm. All my people, get up before we are gone, 'cause we ain't gotta fight if we just unite and tell the world to rise up.
Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this discussion hosted by myself, Brother Bona Muhammad. I'm excited to have all of you here with me. I have three amazing guests. I want to introduce all of them, inshallah, and then we can begin with our discussion. Firstly, we have Dr. Donna Austin, who is based out of New Jersey, and she's an anthropologist, a writer, and public speaker whose work covers much of what we're going to be discussing today. And actually, her dissertation is an ethnographic exploration of spirituality and protest through an examination of Black Muslim life in the era of Black Lives Matter. That's a tongue twister, mashallah. Very good, mashallah. Assalamu alaikum, sister. How are you doing?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well.
Very good. Jazakallah khair for joining us. And we also have with us one of my teachers, the esteemed Sheikh Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick, who was one of the first graduates from North America of the Islamic University Medina in 1979. He's a world-renowned historian and scholar and instructor at Al-Maghrib Institute, as well as the Imam at IIT, Islamic Institute of Toronto. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Perfect. And then lastly, we have Sheikh Imam Shadid Muhammad, who's also a graduate of the Islamic University Medina, where he holds a bachelor's degree in the College of Hadith, and his extensive experience in the field of da'wah, and also his show Mardiya Show, which I watched, by the way. I think is a very, very fantastic show. And as well, his writings and lectures can be found on his site, rawda.info. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
So I invited the three of you here, and to be clear, actually, I invited many different speakers. You three were the few that responded, and you gave me your time, so I really do appreciate that. I wanted to use the recent events at RIS 2016 as a springboard to discuss a larger conversation around race. There were some statements made at this conference in relation to Black Muslims and Black and African American peoples, which many people found offensive, including myself. And I think that in the interest of the Muslim community, we want to have a bit of closure, we want to have a bit of understanding, and using this as a perhaps point of learning so that we can, dispel many of the myths that do exist, and also give people some ways that they can better understand and relate to the struggle that some Black Muslims have to this day. So I want to just go around the spectrum here, inshallah, and just speak to you all firstly about what your initial reactions were, because I know some of you might know Sheikh Hamza personally, some of you have met him, some of you haven't, and we know that he's done a lot of great work in the community. I don't think anybody will go out there and call him a racist and say that he's he holds these particular beliefs, but what he said was very problematic, and it did feed into a lot of negative stigmas around the black community. So I'll just go around and kind of get your first insights and thoughts as to what was your initial reaction when you came across the opinions of Sheikh Hamza. Maybe Dr. Donna, you can start us off, inshallah.
Inshallah. And so maybe it's useful to put up front. I actually do know Sheikh Hamza personally. I consider him a teacher of mine. I've worked with him for, I've known him for 20 years, right? And so, for me, this certainly isn't about some sort of personal vendetta. However, it was pretty disturbing. I heard about the statements via Facebook. I was not at the conference. I heard about them like the morning after. And so I read, Imam Suhaib Webb's post in response to the statements that he made, citing, in response to a question about Black Lives Matter and Muslim solidarity with Black Lives Matter, went into a whole conversation about black on black crime being, right. So for me, it's problematic, not just because I know him personally, and to be honest with you, I feel like he should know better, right? But also it's disturbing in the sense that like these relationships, right, are certainly conservative talking points, right, and they're typically used, right, to justify state violence against Black people, right? This sense that like Black criminality is some type of inherent state of affairs. And the conversation about whether or not Black people have the right to not be shot on sight by police, is often justified by this conversation about inherent Black criminality. In other words, these people are violent savages, so they don't deserve the same protections to life as the rest of us do. So many times when you have an individual, Michael Brown or Brandon Tate Brown, who was killed in Philadelphia a couple of years ago, or Eric Garner, or Tamir Rice even, who was a 12-year-old child, shot on sight by Cleveland police officers within 2.5 seconds. These tropes about their inherent violence and their inherent threat that Black bodies pose, right, is something that, has real consequences for us. Like, when police officers can shoot Black folks without accountability, right, because many people in the population believe that we are inherently dangerous, and somehow less than human because we're so violent, right, you can't just let that go.
Very good. Sheikh Abdullah, your thoughts? And you also do know Sheikh Hamza as well. We should point out that you've known him for many years as well.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wa salam. The result of this RAF's conference and the uproar, that happened really from a Canadian context. And, what I'm bringing to you is not only an American context, because I am an African American, but really from a Canadian context. And a lot of people don't realize that the RISC conference is an American conference held in Canada. That's certainly what's going on. And from the context of the people who were living there and our communities here, it was shocking, actually, what was said, and even more shocking, what came out with the different groups that were struggling, on both sides. I know Sheikh Hamza personally. To be honest, I knew him in the 90s before September 11th, when he was first coming on the scene, when he was not internationally renowned. Right. And I have known him as a sincere person. I don't believe that he is inherently a racist. However, everybody should be held account for what they say. There is nobody above that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala held the Prophet ﷺ to account. Abasa wa tawalla an ja'ahu al-a'ma. The famous, story of the Prophet ﷺ. When the blind man came to him, he frowned and he turned away from the blind man. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him accountable for it. If you look at the lives of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, you find that the great leaders, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, Abu Ubaidah, and all the great leaders, they were accountable to their followers. So within our Islamic understanding, it is the right of every individual to be able to criticize, in a proper way, anybody who says anything. Nobody above criticism, as Imam Malik, would say that the only one who is above criticism is that man. He would point to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ and say, that's the only one. We, the Imams, we are all accountable. And some Imams would even say, if something that I said is against the way of the Prophet ﷺ, take it and throw it against the wall. So nobody is above accountability. And really, what we are discussing today is not really the individual, because he apologized a number of times. I accept his apology. I hope he makes it clearer than what he has done so far. But I accept his apology. And I think really, our discussion, and people's discussion should focus upon, the outcome of this incident and, the extreme issue of racism and white supremacy, especially when we're going into a new administration in the United States, at this very critical time.
Right. And well, lastly, end with Sheikh Shadid, who actually you wrote a very nice piece as well. I read it on your site, and you spoke about this incident. Could you give us your initial reaction and thoughts to what came about when you first came across this statement?
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. I don't know Sheikh Hamza Yusuf personally. I know him as someone who gives lectures. He's well renowned, and that's pretty much the extent. I kind of live in my own bubble, so I kind of concentrate. I'm more grassroots. I'm on the ground in the African American communities here in America, and I kind of like, my blinders are on, so I don't really see outside of what I'm doing. I happened to look on Twitter, and I actually saw your post, Brother Buna, and you said that it doesn't surprise me, the comments of racism, and that kind of piqued my interest, and I'm like, well, what was said, right? So then I sent a tweet out, and I said, does anybody have the statement, I wanted to hear it for myself. I didn't want to I'm not the type of person to just jump on the bandwagon. I wanted to hear it for myself. So I said, does anyone have the exact wording, the clip where I can hear it for myself? Because I saw, tweets, people saying that he's a racist and things like that. And I didn't go that far. I wouldn't go as far as to say he's a racist. I think that's a bit exaggerative. I think that's a bit extreme. Nonetheless, someone sent me the clip, and I heard it for myself, and I said, wow. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, when you look at when you look at someone's background and upbringing, right? I'm from East Orange, right? I'm from the slums, like literally. You know what I mean? I grew up as a foster child. You know what I mean? And my life is like, I'm a poster child for, America's dissidents, the throwaways of America. I mean, I'm not even supposed to be here, So for me to hear someone say the things that he said, I mean, it didn't necessarily bother me personally, but I felt like Sheikh Abdullah has said that, he needs to be, those comments need to be held accountable. If anyone, knows my history or knows my past, I mean, my run-ins with the Salafi community, like I'm the type of person, I have a high sense of justice. So when I see someone being taken advantage of, and I see, someone making a comment that is just, totally beyond, the boundaries of, what is permissible Islamically, I felt like I had to say something. And my comment wasn't, I wasn't like jumping on a beat up Sheikh Hamza Yusuf bandwagon. Like I said what I needed to say, and I kept it moving. I haven't said anything else about it since then. I was on Periscope the other night, and I was telling people, don't ask me any more questions about it. My comments were very clear. I didn't say, I said, he wasn't a racist. I said, but he's a byproduct of a society that has yet to deal with its biggest problem, which is racism. And I cited an incident from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was from Quraysh, he was Qurashi. He came from the hegemony. He was from the upper tiers of Meccan society. And although he converted to Islam, he didn't experience what many of the other companions like Miqdad ibn Aswad, Bilal ibn Abi Rabah, Sumayya, and he didn't experience what they experienced. His acceptance of Islam was pretty much a smooth, transition. No one, subjected him to any persecution or, even verbal. There were incidents, where, some of the chiefs of Quraysh, even when they were throwing slurs at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when it came to Abu Bakr, they kind of sidestepped him because he was well respected in Meccan society. But you had other companions like Bilal, like Sumayya, like Zayd ibn Haritha, and many others that came from more so African backgrounds. And their transition to Islam, although they were Muslim, they still were marginalized, even within the circle of Islam, even within the religion of Islam. And you had other companions like Julaybib, and you had Zahid ibn Haram, and many others, who, if the Prophet ﷺ hadn't even advocated for them, they wouldn't have gotten married. They wouldn't have been, treated equally. We know the very famous narration where Abu Dharr, called, Bilal the son of a black man. And these were, incidents that happened even within the community of the Prophet ﷺ. So, for him to jump out there and just completely dismiss, I personally just thought that it wasn't something that he needed to comment on. If someone was to ask me, what's the problem in the white community? And that's another problem that I have. It's like when Caucasians convert to Islam, they concentrate so much on the black community. They never go back to their own communities. You don't see them confronting people in corporate America. You don't see them confronting the white church. You don't see them saying anything about the KKK. You don't see them saying anything about anything that has to do with the white privilege that they come from. They concentrate all of their, actions on, correcting the black community. And I personally have a problem with that. I'm not going to go, if someone was to ask me, about what's going on in the white community, I would say I'm not the person to answer that because that's not my lane. And for him to jump out there and, throw the black family under the bus like that and to attribute everything that we are experiencing as a people to the breakdown of the black family without looking at the systematic racism that has contributed to the breakdown of the black family, to bypass all of that and go to the black family, I just think it was completely reckless. It was irresponsible for someone of his stature, and, it needed to be countered with haq. That's all I can really say about that.
If I can jump in really quickly, I think that last point that Imam Shadid made is actually pretty critical here. So these conversations about whether or not he as an individual is racist or not, right? They miss the point. So many, and it's not just in the Muslim community, right? When Paula Deen was caught saying the N-word to some of her employees, right? We tend to focus on whether or not someone interpersonally is racist or not, right? We don't talk about the structural, right? Racism is a structural phenomenon, right? And so if you want to talk about police violence against Black people, if you want to talk about why Black people in Flint still do not have clean drinking water, if you want to talk about why some of the challenges that many Black families are facing, right? You have to, if you want to talk about quote unquote Black on Black crime, if you want to talk about, why, you have to talk about systematic disinvestment in inner city communities, right? Which leaves people with no jobs, no resources, and many times not even good places to buy food, right? So, so all of these conversations tend to just focus on, the supposed or assumed pathology, whether we're talking about, quote unquote Black on Black crime or the breakdown of the Black family. Like these are just these are victory states for Black people, right? And it's, and so he may or may not, and racism, and I also want to be clear that whether or not somebody is a racist, there's not we think about it as there is these two extremes. Either you're totally not racist or you're a card-carrying member of the KKK. There are many shades of being racist, right, or participating in racism, right? And so we need to have a more nuanced conversation about what does that even mean to say somebody is racist or not. If you parrot racist ideology, you know, I'm looking at you sideways. You know, you may not be, you know, you may not have a hood in your closet, but you know, that's a problem.
Definitely. And it's good we brought this up, and I think this is a great springboard because, you know, we've established that Sheikh Hamza Yusuf himself, we're not worried about, you know, we don't feel like he's a racist. Nobody here has malice, thought, or intention towards him. But like we said, the statements he did put forth were very troubling. And actually, I had a sister who was at their knowledge retreat. So RIS, after the conference, they have a 1-week knowledge retreat. It's kind of like an intensive seminar. And a sister that was there messaged me and told me that she heard a statement that really troubled her. She said one of the scholars there, she didn't mention who, said that basically criticizing, even when criticism is true, is backbiting, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take away the good deeds of those people and give them to Sheikh Hamza. So anyone who engaged in, you know, even, you know, we could say, you know, just peaceful critique and you know, open criticism of him, this whole notion of backbiting comes up. You know, we're backbiting him, we're slandering him, we're you know, throwing his name in the dirt, and because of that, we are sinful. And you see this a lot in you know, sometimes dictatorships and unfortunately sometimes Muslim countries where, you know, you can't speak ill of the leaders. I want to get some clarification on that. How do we actually fix the problem if we can't even address it? Sheikh Abdullah, maybe you can give me some thoughts on this.
Well, I believe that part of the problem, you know, is with the Muslim community itself. And that is that, you know, as products of racism, we develop an inferiority complex. And what I've noticed in the community over the years, I accepted Islam in 1970. And I had a chance to move around in MSA conferences, you know, move around in the early 70s. I traveled with some of the leaders. And I was able to, like, get a glance at the immigrant community and what was happening. And almost systematically, you know, whenever a Caucasian, a white person accepted Islam, they would be given leadership positions almost immediately. Sometimes without knowledge, sometimes even without ability, without charisma. They would suddenly be in president positions, secretary positions, without having earned it. Sometimes people would even come to them for fatwas, even though they couldn't even speak Arabic or they never studied. And that has to do with an inferiority complex that, you know, within the system of white privilege and white supremacy, the fact that the person is or comes from the dominant society means that that person deserves to be the leader. And the opposite is, if the person comes from the oppressed, so-called lower class society, they deserve to be on the bottom. So, you know, whenever a black person would accept Islam or a Latino would accept Islam, they would usually say, okay, brother, call the adhan or
right.
do security. It's the adhan or security.
Right. Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
the position that the black brother would get.
Absolutely.
Very seldom would you see a black brother actually be placed in the front, you know, to lead the salat or to give the khutbah. And there were a few of us, because of Allah's mercy, having gone through the institutions, you know, in Arabia and came back. We actually were able to break this. Although in some of the immigrant communities, some of the people thought that I was not an Afro-American. They thought I was a Palestinian. Because, you know, there is a tribe Kaf Wal Ya Kaf in Palestine. But instead, Afro-Americans can be speaking Arabic and actually leading us in like it didn't make sense. So this is very, you know, germane to what we're talking. You know, that is a system of white privilege, a system of, you know, an inferiority, you know, that assumes that somebody is correct and above criticism. So assumes that people cannot criticize. And really, this is what has to be addressed. And I hold the organizers of the risk they need to be held account as well.
Absolutely.
Because by setting up this hierarchy, in Canada, it's actually setting us back almost 10 years as far as our youth are concerned. Because we have young Arabs, young Asians, who don't live in America, but they are affected by the propaganda of America.
Right.
And, they are also taking on this type of the pathology of the black community that we are inherently criminals. And what's happening in Canada now is that this is having an impact. And, Muslims come out in mass in Canada, bring down a conservative government. Many Americans may not be aware of the fact that our society took down a Bushite, conservative copper government, who came in on a banner of anti-racism. This type of, with religion in the background, actually strengthens racist concepts and actually pushes our youth towards the conservative community and actually go back 10 years, into this negative racist concept of black people and people of color.
And I'm sorry, just to add to that really quickly, it also, within the context of the Muslim community, because these words were uttered on the lips of a man that many regard as a man of God, they now have divine sanction for their racism. Right? And there is an impact, there is an interpersonal and a systemic impact on Black Muslims within masjid spaces. I know us, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I think all of us have stories of hearing, we can presume that we are not knowledgeable. We have presumed that we're not human. We're not good enough to marry. We're not, right? We have been abused racially in sacred spaces, in spaces that are supposed to be safe. Like you know what it's been like for a Black Muslim in the U.S. for the last 2 years? It's like you getting it coming and going. And I come to the house of God. I come to a man of God. And I get abused in Allah's name, right? That's not nothing to sneeze at, right? And I think this is what is being lost here. When you have people rushing to defend one person, and to let one person off the hook, what's not being addressed here is who's going to care for those Black Muslim kids who are being abused at school, right? Maybe the masjid was semi-safe for them, or they thought that the masjid should be safe, but now they believe that God sanctions their inferiority. This is not something that you can just kind of explain away by reference to your Black friends. There's harm that's been done and will continue to be reproduced because now people believe that they're speaking with Allah's mouth, that I, as a Black person, is less than human.
That's a very good point, and I want to continue this discussion around the same notion. Because, a lot of people love Sheikh Hamza Yusuf to the extent that they just couldn't comprehend he could say something of that magnitude, that it didn't make sense, it too didn't click in their heads. And people invest so much in Muslim personalities and in certain, figures that when they do actually make mistakes like this, it affects their iman. People who will actually come forth and say, I didn't believe a person of God could say something like this. If he can make that type of mistake, then, what is my connection to scholarship in general? Sheikh Shadid, maybe you could comment on that. How should we be critical of these people without, investing every single atom and weight of iman we have in them?
Well, the Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he has a passage in his book, and it's called the Zallat al-Alam, the mistake of the scholar, when the scholar's foot slipped. And the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows this to happen is, number one, to humble the scholar himself. When a scholar makes a mistake, it is by far the most humbling, and I myself am I can testify to that personally. When a person, not to say that I'm a scholar, but when people regard you and hold you in high esteem, a lot of times you don't see yourself, in that. You kind of are elevated to such a degree where you become very reckless, in the words that you utter in public. And eventually that catches up to you. Every author has to own his words. You know, eventually that catches up to you. And when the scholar makes a mistake, it's a test for the scholar, because it's to make him humble, to see whether or not he's going to retract, and he's going to go back and do some self-reflection and look at what he said. And, you know, even if he didn't believe he was completely wrong, but just to humble yourself and come back in front of the people and say, you know what, that comment that I made, it wasn't, you know. And number two, it's a test for the people. As you said, the people, you know, we have, and Muslims for the longest, we've, you know, have this personality worship, you know, and this is the thing that Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu was trying to, you know, rid the community of, even with the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, he said, "Man kana ya'budu Muhammadan fa inna Muhammadan qad mata." Whoever used to worship Muhammad, Muhammad is dead. You know, he's trying to do away with that personality worship. You know, and during one of the battles, Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he removed Khalid ibn Walid from one of the battles. And he said the Muslims don't win battles because of Khalid ibn Walid. He wanted them to understand that you are not winning battles because of the personality of Khalid ibn Walid. You know, and so that's one thing. And the other thing, I mean, scholars past and present, even amongst the Sahaba, criticism is part of our religion. No one is above, you know, being criticized. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ya ayyuhan nabiyyu ittaqillah. You know, O Prophet, fear Allah. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet to fear Allah, no one is above being told to fear Allah. No one is above being criticized. No one is above being critiqued. As you know, Sheikh Abdullah mentioned, you know, Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, "Kullun yu'khad min qawlihi aw yurad." Every person's statement or opinion could either be accepted or rejected. You know, Hamza Yusuf didn't follow up his statement with, you know, any ayat from the Quran or any, you know, hadith from the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to back his comment. It was just his opinion, and you know, in actuality, the opinion was wrong. It was wrong. It was erroneous. So, I mean, you know, you're always going to have people that are going to defend you, you know, no matter what you say. Sometimes I've, you know, uttered comments that were, you know, controversial. I'm just a controversial person. I, you know, enjoy stirring the pot sometimes, because I believe if two people are the same, then one of you are irrelevant. You know, if we all agreeing all the time, you know, then there's no fun in that. But sometimes, you know, I've said things that were, you know, controversial, and, you know, I've come back and I've apologized and corrected that. But even in the process of that, I had people that were defending me, you know, like, no, you know, we know this brother for so many years, blah, 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 blah. So you're always going to have people that are going to, you know, as the Arabs, they have a saying, you know, Ayn al-Rida, you know, that the eye of pleasure doesn't see any fault. Lakin al-Ayn al-Sakh tubdi ma'adir, that the eye of hatred, it sees all of your mistakes. You know, when you don't like someone, you can pick out every little mistake that they do. But when you are totally pleased with someone, you don't see anything wrong with them. You don't see anything they do wrong, right? So, I mean, these things happen. So I think the most important thing that needs to happen in this situation, number one, amongst African American leadership, there needs to be more dialogue. These things should open, you know, doors for us to now have honest conversations about, you know, some of our negligence and some of our problems that we need to address. And number two, you know, for the more broader Islamic community to open discussions. You know, foreign Muslims, they tend to think that, you know, they have this aversive racism. You know, we're all just Muslim. No, we're not all just Muslim. You know, you're a Palestinian Muslim. I'm an African American Muslim. We're not just all Muslims. And they think by saying that, that kind of softens the blow. But actually, that is in itself a form of racism, to not see me, to not acknowledge me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that we created you in different nations and tribes. Li ta'arafu. Li here means for the purpose, a sababiyya, for the purpose to know and acknowledge one another. So don't say we're all Muslim. I don't see race. I don't see color, because that in fact in itself is racism. It is a form of racism. So, you know, it's uncomfortable, but we have to, as one of the professors on the documentary, The 13th, I don't know if you guys saw that. And he said that one of the things that cell phones do today is it forces a conversation. In the past, where people were abused and beaten, nobody really had any concrete evidence other than the person's statement. But now, today, you can record something, and in a minute, you can hit send, and it can go halfway across the world with just a click of a button, and it forces a conversation. So this comment that Hamza Yusuf had, the next RIS conference, we should be having a discussion about this. And if we're not having a discussion like this, then we need to shut the conference down. Honestly, I'm all for it. I will catch a flight to Canada and shut that down. Shut it down. No, you're not having no more conferences. If this is what your conferences are going to entail, then we will boycott your conferences. We will stand out in front. We will hold up signs. We will call you racist. We'll do whatever we need to do. If we're not going to have a conversation about the last comment that was made at your conference and open up a door for a broader conversation, if we're not having that, then you're not having a conversation. You're not having a conference.
Based on this, I mean, I want to appeal to the broader Muslim community, especially to the non-African Muslims, that in this critical atmosphere of Islamophobia, where the president-elect ran on a campaign of a negative Islamophobia. It is critical now for us to really understand each other, and also to really understand the history of America and the history of Muslims in America. And that statement, to say that the real problem, is the breakdown of the black family, to not recognize racism and white supremacy, systemic racism, is a critical misunderstanding, of the whole history of this country. It's like a doctor who sees the patient. The patient is sick, and the doctor says, your problem is a fever and it's a rash. When actually the real problem is a virus.
Right.
And the virus here is systemic racism, white supremacy, which right from the beginning, when African people came, in the early 1600s, and when they first came in, marriage was illegal. And up until 1865, it was illegal. And, you could only jump over a broomstick or the whole attack on the family. We have to look at, the black male mortality. Black males were being killed in the fields, also killed in the wars, and now killed in the prison systems and on the street. What does that do to the family? We have to look at the rape of black women. Rape was instituted in the society where the body of a black woman wasn't her own. It was owned by the white master. We have to look at this issue, all the factors that were involved in this, and realize, that this is greater than, the propaganda propagated by the alt-right and by people of this mentality, who would reduce, our history to so-called criminality. And to say, well, why don't you get a job?
Right.
I mean, why don't people just, take care of your communities?
Right.
Look at the mess that you're in your community. When they are the reason for the mess. And Muslims, if Muslims inherit this, then they are taking in, their own destruction.
Right. I mean,
Islamophobia is now, Islamophobia, in my conclusion, is going to put them in the same position as us. Their honorary status has been burnt. They are no longer honorary citizens of America. They're going to catch the same thing as the First Nations, as African people, as the Mexican people. They're going to catch it too. They have to realize, in these conferences, we have to seriously look at the history and put things in perspective.
Yeah. It feeds into the narrative that, how is it that foreign Muslims can move here and open up stores and have all of this thing? And African Americans, you guys have been here from the very beginning and you still don't have anything, right? What he said feeds into that same narrative. I've had conversations, with brothers who said the same thing. It's like, well, how is it that African Americans have been here all of this time? And my dad came here as a refugee, and after 10 years, he owns his own home and he has a thriving business and things like that. But they don't understand, the systematic racism, the marginalization of a people based upon skin color, right? So, yeah, we need to have a broader discussion about this. I'm not.
Sorry, Donna. I just want to ask you a question, Dr. Donna, because I think a very good point was brought up, and we've heard this term a lot being used. This black pathology. This idea that black people are inherently criminalized, and African Americans are coming from this background where they just are natural-born killers and thieves and criminals. But people actually on my page, I found this very interesting. A sister actually posted, what was wrong with his statement, and this was a black girl who said that I agree that black families are messed up, and she said that not just African Americans. She said, what about African communities? You look at their families and their fathers are not there, and she started citing this kind of almost agreeing with him, and almost seemed like she's internalized the sentiment. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, what does that actually mean? Because people are now thinking about that statement and thinking, well, there's an ounce of truth in it. Yes, black families are problematic, but why exactly is that comment so destructive, considering the fact that the situation in many African American communities is that, the families aren't in the best situations?
So, yeah, so racism is external and internal, right? So there is a sense in which, random white person X might direct racist sentiments or actions toward me as a person of color. But Malcolm X talked about this a lot. I mean, this is really, and in a large part, Malcolm X and more broadly the Nation of Islam's project was kind of this process of decolonizing spirituality, right? Where we needed to divest in white Jesus, right? We needed to divest in paradigms of religiosity that were based upon our inferiority as just the way God made the world. And so we, because racism, particularly in the U.S., but I should point out that, anti-blackness, right, is a global phenomenon, right? So many Muslims are, come from lands that have been colonized, right? And white supremacy, is the organizing principle of the colonial order. And so, many of us, maybe the way it plays out, right, the groups involved or the particular sets of individuals and how, how this works out in India or South Africa or whatever, right, or Brazil, might be different in terms of the particulars, right? There's a sense in which, right, white supremacy is a phenomenon that we've all been touched by if we live in the modern age. And those effects are external and they're internal. External effects might mean that I am harassed or violated or brutalized by the police officers, right? But then internalized is when I start to think that I deserve that type of treatment, right? And it is reinforced by the political order. It is reinforced by the social order. It's reinforced on the job. And in many cases, it's reinforced in the houses of worship, right? Not just Muslim ones, right? Because again, if you know anything about the history of the Nation of Islam or the Moorish Science Temple or the groups that were calling people to to these what they understood to be Islam, put the process of kind of ridding people of this belief in their inherent inferiority and taking that out of the way that they approached God, right? I think, many of us can kind of disagree with the theology or whatever, but what they were doing was extremely important because, again, if you are a Muslim child, and I think we're, not in this conversation necessarily, but the broader conversation that's taking place around this incident, children are still forming their sense of self. They're still trying to figure out who they are, right? And when a man with that type of spiritual authority reinforces everything they've heard at school or in the street, how are they gonna not believe that their pathology is fitra, right? So this is a huge deal. I mean, and there's so many examples of that, not just in religious spaces, but if we think about the ways that, for example, skin bleach cream, right, is the number one selling cosmetic in so much of the Muslim world, right? Or other places in the so-called third world, right? That may not be Muslim majority, right? But this sense that people would actually apply daily and religiously a substance to their faces that harms their health, right, and disfigures them, right, because it is better to do that than to be in a black body. We need to rid ourselves of blackness, whatever the cost, right? We need to understand that that we have internalized, and all of us. I mean, I think even for someone like me who likes to think that I've escaped most of this, right? Are these implicit biases for Black people and non-Black people are like none of us are free of that, right? And I think we constantly have to check ourselves, but again, it's really, the psychological impacts of this type of thinking are long term, right? And they are extremely damaging. They can be damaging to one's emotional state, to one's spiritual state, right? And so we need to think about what this type of reinforcement of an erroneous worldview does to people emotionally and psychologically, right? Because those effects are not small.
So I know a lot of us have heard of this term, white fragility, right? It makes it very difficult to speak about race with white people because automatically they become sensitive. They become very, it makes them very uncomfortable because you start almost, telling them or having that conversation with them in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable. But is there such thing as brown fragility? I mean, is this a thing that we can assist to other Muslim communities that, for example, the moment we have a conversation around race with people from the subcontinent or people from Arab lands, it's like they become very hostile. You're not really able to express these sentiments correctly because automatically they think that you're blaming them for something. Do we think this is a concept that exists? Sheikh Abdullah, what do you think?
Yes, it does exist. It's not really the same as in America itself. But what you have to realize is that, people from Asia, the Indo-Pakistani subcontinent, are coming out of a caste system-based society. And really the caste system where the Brahmins, over 1,000 years ago or so, came in, light-skinned people from Russia, came in and colonized the dark-skinned Dravidian people of India. They set up a caste system based on color. And caste in the Sanskrit is varna, which means color. So literally the lighter you are is the better you are, and the darker you are is the worse you are. And this affected many people throughout Asia itself. And within Arabia itself, there was a concept, of color. It's not the same as in India or in America, but it's also there. So what we have to realize is that, people within the immigrant Muslim community, are carrying racism within their culture. And the whole struggle of tribalism and racism is a critical issue for them.
Absolutely.
Normal Arabic-speaking people, use the word slave. I was amongst some, Bedouins in Medina once. I'm learning Arabic and I'm talking to them. And when they were speaking about this, darker-skinned person, they were saying abd. And abd means a slave. And so I'm innocent, and I'm saying to him, no, he's not abd, because he's a Muslim. And they say, no, he's abd. And basically, what it came down to, they basically said these people were made to be subjugated to us. So therefore, I don't hate him. He's just a slave. Because their understanding of black people at that point in time,
right,
was slavery. And you have this, it's coming, within the cultures. It is tribalism, racism. It is described as a filthy thing. It is netted. It is a rotten, filthy attitude, which is alive and well in different ways in the Muslim world. And so this is compounded when people come here with this concept of color from the caste system, or from the Arab tribal system, even in Mauritania itself, where you have the light-skinned people, and you have the darker-skinned people who are subjugated. When they come here, and then come into this white privilege-based society, this compounds the racism. And unless a person really has taqwa and combines it with knowledge of history, and really, sincerity and humility, they can very easily get caught up in this system, and they can want to go as high as possible, to be as white as possible, and to respect more lighter skinned people, because it's power. It's the power or seeming power in the world today. But that's all part of the illusion. This is an illusion that we're all living in. But Muslims have to come out of this illusion. And the problem is now is that unless we can work with our communities now, especially the youth, and really give them systematic, historical understanding, of Islam in America, of Black Muslims, of Islam in Africa, and in other parts of the world. Unless they understand this, they can very easily fall, into the trap, of a strange form of racism that pops up even in the Muslim community.
Absolutely.
And I think, I'm sorry, just quickly, I think there's an excellent resource. It's a short essay by Toni Morrison from 1993 called On the Backs of Blacks. And she talks about the ways that various immigrant groups coming to the U.S. have kind of stepped into the system of racial hierarchy that exists in the U.S. And positioning themselves, in a way that, kind of proximity to whiteness is a goal and an operating principle. And that a lot of the success, economic success of many immigrant groups, right, comes on the backs of Black oppression and Black struggle. Right, and so that's an interesting, I think, resource for people to kind of read more about how this operates. And I think we also need to understand that within the Muslim community, I mean, there's a sense that, like, okay, if I'm oppressed in one sphere, right, so maybe I'm oppressed as a brown person, more generally speaking, right, I'm not white, and I may experience some kind of social alienation as a result of that within the total kind of hierarchy. That doesn't mean that I can't be oppressive to others, right? And so there are geminic structures and organizations that exist within our Muslim community. Sheikh Quick talked about earlier. About his experience with, kind of how this played out in the earlier 70s and in these MFAs, right? How Black Muslims are not presumed to be able to lead community or to be able to handle intellectual lifting, right? This is how many of our Muslim communities are organized, right? And so there's still a hierarchy within maybe a larger hierarchy that exists in a society more broadly. And so when many brown Muslims are critiqued about that, right, it's hard for them to come to terms with the fact that they might be participating in oppression, even as people who are oppressed themselves to some extent or another.
It's a real, the years I spent in South Africa, I spent 10 years in South Africa. And, one of the tricks of apartheid is that they separated the African community that they call Africans from what they call the colored community. So the colored community are mixed people between African and European, or Indians or Malays. African community are the original Zulu, Xhosa, Tswana, Sotho, the African nations. So they succeeded in dividing these communities. So in Cape Town itself, you have a struggle between the colored and the Africans. All of them are Africans, because Africa is a huge place with all types of people, different shades and different colors. But somehow the coloreds identify with the whites, although they're not considered white, and they hate the blacks, so they're afraid of the blacks. So this is a trick. This is a part of the divide and conquer scheme. To divide people up, and Muslims need to realize this, that brown Muslims, in looking at the issue of race, they're actually expanding their consciousness. They can come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if they can drop some of the hatred and bigotry, that might have been put into them by trick. So we need to understand, how this plays out. And, it does play out within our community, and probably more in Canada than it does in the United States, because we don't have a large black population within the Muslim community. The indigenous Muslims, the black Muslims in Canada, are generally from the Caribbean or from Africa, and then they haven't been settled really, in Canada for a long time. They are sort of like immigrants in a sense. And so this is even more dangerous, for our community, which is in this immigrant stage, and trying to seek, power, and it's critical for us, that they, understand, the history of Islam in America. They understand what happened to the First Nations. They understand slavery. They understand, colonialism, what America and Canada really are. It's crucial for us to understand this. Now, especially since we're going into a phase where Muslims are being called the other, where we're being called aliens. We have nothing to do with the society. If we can't identify, if we can't say Black Lives Matter, right, in a broad sense, you might not agree with, all the actions of the leadership, but if we cannot say Black Lives Matter, right, if we can't stand with the native people, struggling, for their water and their land, if we can't identify with Mexican people, who really are going to pay for the wall,
then it's wrong with us, man. We should look at these groups as allies. And that is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the good and forbidding evil.
Making allies, as he did with Banu Hashim in Mecca, of the people who are oppressed. This is part of our Islamic identity. Absolutely. And we have to come out of this bubble.
Absolutely.
Out of this narrow approach to Islam.
I want to ask Imam Shadid a question, because a lot of times when we do study Islamic history, and I'll give you my own example, learning about the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, we always hold Bilal in such a high esteem, right? But even when we talk about Bilal, he was still a slave. And that kind of, that feeds into, sometimes I feel, the way we as Black Muslims even view ourselves, that yes, we were there, we were part of the beginning of Islam, but it was still with this negative connotation. This type of, thing plays with people's minds. You find sometimes with these very, liberal, progressive Muslim movements, they'll criticize Islam and say, Islam is inherently racist. They were part of the Arabian slave trade, and Prophet ﷺ had slaves. And how do we contextualize our history and Islamic tradition with the notion that Black pathology in many ways existed, or it seems like it existed even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ?
Well, it did. I mean, we can't deny that. It did. But the Prophet ﷺ, he addressed that. He addressed that on from so many different angles. We can't say because then we kind of fall, in line with what many of the immigrant community, they'll come off like, well, there's no racism in Islam, right? And they'll just kind of brush it off as if there's no racism in Islam. And as Muslims, when these types of issues are brought up about, blacks were considered slaves. The Prophet ﷺ had slaves. And, first of all, we need to look at the socio cultural context of slavery during that time and how the Prophet ﷺ addressed that. Yes, there were slaves. Yes, people were indentured servants. Yes, that did exist. We're not going to deny that. We're not going to sit here and say, no, Islam came to do away with that. No, Islam came to regulate that to a point where it gave dignity and honor to people who were, considered less than, and to raise them to a level. For example, is one of the scholars, very famous scholar, many people don't know, Muhammad ibn Sirin, whose mother was a slave that belonged to Anas ibn Malik, and his father was a slave that belonged to Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr freed her, and Anas freed his father, and they married or whatever, and they had a child. And one of the children they had was Muhammad ibn Sirin. that famous tabi'i who said, "Inna hadha al-din fanzur man ta'khuduna dinakum," that this knowledge is the religion, so let every one of you look who you take your religion from. Muhammad ibn Sirin was a child born to parents who were slaves. And his mother said to him, she said that, in most circles, you are going to be the laughing stock. She said, "Lakin alayka bil ilm fa innahu yarfa'uk." She said, but stick to seeking knowledge because knowledge will raise you. Knowledge in the religion of Islam is the absolute equalizer. Ata ibn Abi Rabah, one of the top students of Abdullah ibn Abbas, who was an African slave. He had one eye, the tips of his fingers used to curl over. He was unsightly. He was not a handsome looking person. However, the leader, Marwan ibn Hakam, he went to go make Hajj, but he didn't know the rights of Hajj. And he took his 2 sons with him, and he had to go talk to Ata about the rights of Hajj. And Ata was praying, so he had to sit and wait with his sons until he was finished praying. And then when he was finished, Ata turned around and he began to ask him questions about the rights of Hajj. And when Ata felt like his questions were overwhelming and a man of your stature should know how to make Hajj, Ata got up and walked away. And he turned around and he said to his sons, he said, "Stand up." He said, "Never neglect to seek knowledge of this religion." He said, "Because I will never, ever forget the most humiliating position that I had to take in front of this black slave." So understand something, that this dynamic existed, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ to the time of the Tabi'un. This was, there was a blanket that was, we try to throw over this dynamic, like we were all Muslims and we all got along. They were all companions. No. This was real and it existed. And, for the past year, I have been trying to kind of shed light on that, and kind of humanize the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. But we can't shy away from that. It should open dialogue. And we shouldn't say, well, because they had slaves and slavery existed during that time, that kind of feeds into the black pathology of today. No, there was a social, cultural context for that. And life is paradoxical in that you can only live it forward, but you can only understand it backwards. And in order for us to understand the current cultural context of that, we have to go back into their society and look at it. I gave a discussion this morning on a webinar, and they were asking about, the Prophet ﷺ marrying Aisha at 9 years old, right? And when you think about it, and all the way up into the 1960s, right here in America, the average age for sexual consent, we're not even talking about marriage, sexual consent was 10 years old. In Delaware, which is where I live right now, the actual age for sexual consent was 7 years old in the 1960s. So when you talk about the Prophet ﷺ marrying a girl at 9 years old, we have to look at the socio-cultural context of that. And, we shouldn't shy away from these discussions. I'm one of those people, someone can say, well, oh, you're going to defend that? Yes, I'm going to defend it. My wife might say to me, well, you're going to defend that? Yes, I'm going to defend it. Yes, absolutely. But we can have a discussion about that. But I'm not going to shy away. I'm not going to back away from that. Yes, it existed. But it doesn't feed into the black pathology of today, where we're now starting to feel like we belong in this position of inferiority, because the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't care about skin color. His concentration was solely on the refinement of an individual's character. And he placed people in positions based upon that, had nothing to do with their hierarchy, nothing to do with, their socio-economic status. It had nothing to do with any of that. It had to do with their fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their understanding of the religion. That was it. That is the ultimate equalizer in our religion, regardless of where you come from. But we're not going to deny that there were companions that came from, the lower levels of society. However, in doing that, you look at a man like Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, who came from Yemen, poor guy, had nothing, used to live on the back porch of the masjid, and he said that I saw over 300 of the companions who used to live in the masjid, poor individuals, and each and every one of them after some time became a governor, amir or wazir, became a governor or a leader over some particular endeavor because of the dua that the Prophet ﷺ made for them. He would pass by them and see them in the state that they were in. So his job was to raise these people. And you know, to go back to Hamza Yusuf's comment, you know, what was offensive is that instead of, you know, sitting back from a place of privilege and saying, you know, well, black people kill more, you know, black people kill black people, you know, right, to brush it off like that, as opposed to the position, the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ in uplifting people, you know, that were the marginalized, the minorities of society. If the Prophet ﷺ was here right now, do you think that he would have aided the Black Lives Matter, aided, you know, the Native Americans in their fight for, you know, their land and their turf, so they don't build, you know, these pipes and things underneath their land? Do you think that the Prophet ﷺ would? He did that when he was alive. Whenever he found that there were some slaves that believed in him, he went to them and he purchased their freedom and he advocated for them. You know, Abu Jundal, you know, who, when he was signing the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah and he came shackled up, and he told the Prophet ﷺ, you know, how can you sign the peace treaty and send me back to a people who disbelieve? He said, be patient. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make a way out for you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a way out for Abu Jundal. He advocated for the underdog, advocated for the marginalized in society. You know, and, you know, I think we've gotten away from that as a community. We've gotten away from that. We've moved so far away from that. You know, so now we see ourselves as, you know, the Muslim community is here with all of our problems and internal issues. And, you know, the other marginalized societies and organizations that are fighting for their rights to be recognized as human beings on par with the hegemony, you know, it's like we don't have anything to do with that. You know, when Hamza Yusuf was asked about, you know, Muslims being involved in, you know, Black Lives Matter and other organizations that are, you know, civil rights organizations that are fighting for, you know, their civil rights, he sidestepped the issue. And we tend to do that a lot in the Muslim community. You know, we tend to sidestep the issue. No, should we be involved in these communities? And if we are involved, because then there's another issue to that. And to what extent should we be involved? You know, it's not, yes, let's just jump out there and be involved, but to what extent should we be involved? You know, should we just be involved holding hands and singing Kumbaya, or should we be involved in trying to uplift people and to bring in to them a consciousness of God? You know, not just being involved like that. You know what I mean? I personally don't think that we should just be involved with any organization without bringing our Islamic identity to the table. I don't sit at the table with anybody except I'm a Muslim first. La ilaha illallah comes first.
I think it's important for us to recognize the fact, you know, as a Muslim community, you know, in looking at the history, you know, of the Western countries in the past 400 or 500 years, you know, that color has been used, you know, as a means of domination.
Right.
Even slavery in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it wasn't the same as in the past 500 years.
Right.
Yes, there was a predominance of African slaves, but the reality was Salman al-Farisi from the Persian, he was a slave.
Right.
Wahib al-Rumi, you know, who was the white-skinned Iraqi, you know, like called a European, he was a slave.
Right.
You know, Zayd Haritha, the Arab, was a slave. Right. And so, you know, although there were a number of African, you know, slaves, at the same time, it wasn't the same as the past 500 years. And what we're dealing with now is a sickness. It's a disease. Color has entered into our value system, and it's affecting Muslims.
Right.
Color was used to dominate, you know, to justify, you know, the transport of millions of people from Africa. Color was even used, you know, as a religious justification, you know, painting, you know, God, you know, as, you know, a white man, Jesus, you know, the Son of God, or God, using a color. Even in the dictionaries, only recently they've changed the dictionaries. Mm-hmm. So it says black. If you say black, it means something dirty and negative and evil. You know, if you say black magic, that's bad, evil magic. If you say white magic, good magic,
Right.
the word white in the dictionary, and they're just changing it now, used to mean, and it still means in many people's minds, white equals innocent, pure, and holy.
Right.
So therefore, if a white, youth is arrested selling drugs, because they sell as much drugs as the black youth,
Right.
they are presumed as innocent till proven guilty. If a black person is caught, he's guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
And this is racism. This literally affects our value system, the way we look at things. And so Muslims have to be vigilant. It is part of our deen, to struggle against this disease, this mental disease, this skewed way of looking at the world, and bring in, the true brotherhood and sisterhood of Islam. And this we need to look at, as part of our struggle.
Very good. Dr. Don, I want to ask you a question as well, because you hinted at something a bit earlier. This feeling that, like, I'll give you my own example. I have, 2 children, alhamdulillah. My oldest daughter is about to enter into Islamic school, hopefully, inshallah, next year. And one of the concerns myself and my wife have is, what will her situation be? I mean, she's going to be entering a school that she'll be pretty much the only black child there. And we know even in those so-called sacred spaces, race does play an issue. And for young children, I mentioned it earlier, but I want to really touch on this point. Young Muslim children who are being taught that the only time we're mentioned in Islamic history is when we were slaves, or people like Bilal, who was a slave, or this legacy of negative connotation that is attached to black people. How do we uplift our children, the youth who are growing up with this mentality, and they start to internalize this particular ideology that, we are inferior? How do we help these youth and the parents who are trying to educate them?
Well, for me, when my girls were small, and my oldest was approaching school age, I was dealing with precisely that dilemma. The Islamic schools that were in my local area, my child would have been the only or one of the only, and and I had spent some time praying with those believers, and I kind of knew what the deal was. I was like, yeah, I'm not. I mean, you can't convince me that it makes sense for me to subject my children to that type of indoctrination and abuse, because it's abuse, right? In the name of Islam, right? And so what is that going to do to their iman? How is that going to make them feel about wanting to be Muslim, right? Wanting to, I'm not going to fork over thousands of dollars thousands of dollars in money every year, to have people teach my child that Allah created them as a second class being. I couldn't do it. So, I mean, and I recognize, but of course that's not an option for everybody, right? I would suggest that for those of us who might not have that as an option, think about the ways that you can at home, wrap your children in self-love. So one of the things that I also did, I mean, even though, I was homeschooling my kids, I mean, I made it a point to, I would go to 7 stores looking for a black doll, or books, to read to my children that feature black characters. And, so all of these things are, and it's not just messages they get about race. I mean, they get all kinds of weird, I have 3 girls, so, there was always these, all the girls' toys were kitchens and stoves, right? And I'm like, what, the boys can't cook? Listen, that's, so cognizant of the subliminal messages that are surrounding your children, even in things that are supposed to be innocent, right? Their toys, their play circles, right? You might have to have a Black History Holocaust for your children, right? Whatever. You need to create spaces and means by which your children can learn to love each other, right? And love themselves. And this is how. This is what I mean. I think many of us as Muslim parents are kind of thinking about, the ways that
our children might be challenged in a public school atmosphere, right? You know, in terms of, you know, exposure to drugs or other types of behaviors that are, you know, that are not particularly what we want for our children, like as Muslims. But we don't think as hard about what it means when my child goes into a Muslim space and hears that they are abs, right? So I think that, like, just trying to, like, positive reinforcement as much as you can, at any and every opportunity, you know, making sure that your children see Muslims that look like them, in a positive light, right? I also wanted my children to see, like, Black imams giving khutbah. So, you know, I mean, all this stuff matters. I mean, I think it's interesting to think about, like the Brown versus Vegetation case, right? Which may or may not know, it was the Supreme Court case in the 1950s, whereby American schools were desegregated by race, right? This was the ruling. One of the pieces of evidence, right, was by psychologists looking at these inherent preferences that children at a very young age had already developed for white dolls. Like, so they would give a child a black doll, a choice of a white doll. They're equal, right? They, you know, except that their skin color is different. And already by age, you know, 3, 4, 5, 10, these children, Black children and white children, overwhelmingly were choosing the white doll. And, you know, it's better, it's prettier, it's more aesthetic. I mean, they're not using words like aesthetically pleasing, that vibe, right? But they're, you know, they're already showing a preference based on color at a very young age, right? So, so we got to get in there and be proactive in every way. And so showing your children, you know, showing your children positive reflections of themselves at every turn is very important.
I think also it's you know, important for us to go back into our history, right from the time of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. You know, we can actually show, you know, along with the other great companions, you know, we can show African people who made great contributions beside Bilal. You know, what I did was, you know, I went and got a master's and PhD from the University of Toronto in the history of Islam in Africa. You know, as a personal way for my children, and also as a means of dawah, and to educate the major Muslim community. Right now, as the head of the history department of Maghwara Institute, you know, I'm teaching courses to thousands of students. You know, one is Shadows in the Sun, and one of the main Sahaba that I'm dealing with, you know, is not the classical, you know, Khulafa Rashidin. It's other people. One of them is Ayman radiallahu anha, who was the Ethiopian woman who was the second mother of the Prophet. Wow. You know, and when you read his life, he loved her more than any other woman, just like his mother. He would literally stand up and leave the halaqah and go to meet her if she came inside the masjid. Muhammad ibn Maslama, radiallahu anhu, who was called Faris al-Nabi. You know, he was, you know, the knight of the Prophet. You know, there are so many. Then we can look into our history itself, and you will see contributions, you know, that African Muslims have made. You know, great ulama, great leaders, and especially West African history, you know, great, you know, empires and whatnot. So along with the other aspects of Islamic history, then we can focus on this as well, you know, for our children and for the greater Muslim community to have this understanding. I used to get books, you know, showing Islam, the spread of Islam. You know, it would always show that Islam was above the Sahara Desert. Mm-hmm. So below the Sahara Desert, there was no Islam. Mm. Okay, and this is ignoring, you know, thousands of Muslims who lived in the Islamic empire. You know, who had an impact not only on, you know, the greater world, but even in America, because we are now recognizing that many of the slaves and political prisoners who came to the Americas were actually scholars. You know, some studied in Timbuktu. That was a great center of learning. Others, you know, you see the story of Abdurrahman, Prince Among Slaves, you know, from Timbo, and, you know, Yaro Mahmud, and so many of the great Muslim, you know, scholars who actually suffered in the slavery period. So this is important for us to bring this up and to teach it not only to our children but to other people as well. So we can actually go into our sources as another means of raising self-esteem and knowledge.
Very good. I want to try and wrap up. I know this conversation it's so lively and there's so little time left, but I want to try and just answer a few more questions. One is that a lot of the criticism that I found from people during the RIS weekend of people like myself and other Black Muslim activists who were online and we were engaging in this discourse was that we shouldn't be offended. And, he didn't mean it. What he said was, a slip of the tongue. It's not a big deal. We shouldn't worry about that. There are bigger fish to fry. I want to know who gets to decide how offended we should be, right? Because I agree that there perhaps could be an extreme. People could start, going to his house and trying to, cause him physical damage and harm. And these things are unacceptable. But in that scope of protest, in that scope of critique, who gets to decide exactly how offended we should be, or if we should be offended at all? I mean, Shadid, maybe you can chime in as to what does that actually look like, us being offended?
People are entitled to their emotions and their opinions. I mean, no one can tell you shouldn't be offended. If someone makes a comment, someone says something, I mean, your emotions are your emotions. You're entitled to that. I think that, going as far as calling him a racist and, all of the we want to create a movement now around, this. And I just think that that's a bit much. I think that this should be an eye opener for the African American Muslim community, especially here in America. This should be an eye opener for us to show us, because you have many African American imams who don't even identify as an African American. I mean, you have many Muslims who are African American who don't identify with African American. They say, I'm not African American, I'm Muslim. I've heard many African American Muslims say the same thing, and I mean, throughout the years, I've been in the Muslim community, from pretty much from New York to New Jersey to Philadelphia for the past 20 years since I've been a Muslim. And I haven't heard the more Sunni imams even, identify themselves as African American Muslims and even talk about issues that are relevant to African American Muslims. We kind of just, broad brush, the issues of the Islamic community. And the only time that we want to talk about issues that are relevant to our communities is when we're talking about criminals and fornication and adultery, and we kind of hammer the community, but there's never any upliftment of the communities as a people. And I think that this discussion needs to happen with us, first and foremost. I mean, there needs to be maybe a national conference, where African American imams, are brought to the table, and these things, the same questions that you are asking now, because we need to identify, because you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. So we need to identify which leaders are actually a part of the solution. Who can we bring to the table, like-minded, that can sit down and have these discussions and then take those discussions to the broader Islamic community. And if they don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the knowledge to have these discussions with their communities, then maybe they can bring in people like Sister Donna. They can bring in people like Sister Camilla, Sister Marguerite. They can bring in people that can educate their communities to these issues, but to remain silent and not say anything, then I think that, you're pretty much part of the problem. But I mean, no one can say that you shouldn't be offended. If someone makes a comment and I say that I'm offended, then leave me to my feelings. Don't try to discredit that. Don't try to invalidate that. Validate me. Validate the way that I feel, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. I mean, because you will never understand why I took issue with that until you can walk in my shoes and understand, what it feels like. I mean, I can't erase my skin color. I'm black 24/7. That's not going to go anywhere, But
this is my last question now. Are you ready? This is it. I'm going to build up to this. I know that we've taken a long time, but I want to end with this because there were many non-black Muslims that did approach me, and like the sister who emailed me, who said that they were very offended. She said that actually when he made that comment and when he made his apology, she actually clapped, and it wasn't until she left that she realized, why was I clapping? It was just she was caught up in the moment of the entire thing. What can we offer as advice to our non-black Muslim community, our brothers and sisters? They are our brothers and sisters in faith. What can we offer to them as advice, as solutions to become more conscious of those tones of racism? What can we offer them as ways to become allies of their own Muslim black brothers and sisters? Let's start off with Dr. Dawn, and then we'll end with Shadid as well, inshallah.
So I think, thinking about your last two questions is kind of bundled together. This sense that the most important thing here is intentions, which none of us can actually know for sure anyway, right? This is the knowledge of the hearts of Allah, right? But there is impact, right? And I think distinguishing intent versus impact, right, is what we need to do. And we actually, I think for a lot of us who might be saying, well, can't we just get over it, or can't we just move on, or it wasn't that big of a deal, right? There needs to be an address to the injury, which means that people who are not the subject of this false. And I mean, I need to, kind of emphasize here that what he said is categorically and factually false. Is to just stop trying to, tell people, about their own injuries and listen. Right? If we are a community that is one fellowship, if we are mirrors to one another, if we are, all of these things that we repeat ad nauseum, do we actually know what that looks like? Do we actually know what it means? That if one part of the body aches, the rest of it feels the fever? Do we really know what that means? Because if all of these injured black Muslims are saying, yo, this was really painful to hear him say that, and your reaction as my brother or my sister is, be quiet and move on. We're not one ummah. We're not one body, right? So, I think, we need to center the agreed, and that's Sharia, right? This is, if somebody stabs me, right, they can't just say, I didn't mean to stab you, and watch me bleed out and not call the ambulance. I'm still bleeding, right? So, so there needs to be an actual, conversation about how we redress or remediate the injury that has taken place. And for people who are not impacted by this directly, that means they need to be quiet and listen, to be completely blunt. It's not for me to decide if I punch somebody in the face that, that they shouldn't complain about it, right? I actually, as the offender, or the person who's going to defend the offender, right, I actually need to say, how do we tend to the injured? What do we need to do? And that, to kind of heal the injury that was inflicted on some folks. A part of our ummah, and that means that we have to listen.
Very good. Sheikh Abdullah, final thoughts? How do we help our community get over this harm?
I want all of us, within our community to reflect upon, the Prophet's peace and blessings be upon him. Can we really say that we're following the Sunnah, we're really following the example of the Prophet when he was surrounded right from the beginning with the poorest, most oppressed? These are the majority of the Muslims. These are the ones that he can't, and he said that I want to die with the poor, I want to be raised on the day of resurrection as poor people, right? With oppressed people, right? And so can we really call ourselves followers of the Prophet if we don't, deal with hurt, within our brothers and sisters? So I believe this is a learning time. It's a good practice. If we look at it in a positive way, it can be a win-win situation. We'll grow out of this. We listen to our brothers and sisters, when they are harmed. It is said that if a person is leading salah, that a strong imam, bases his prayer on the weakest in his jama'ah.
Right.
Right? So if you understand, you have to understand those who are oppressed, within your community. And then I believe we can gain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because right now, we're in a dangerous period. In a period where we're talking about, programs, and Muslims are going to be right at the forefront of this. This refreshment that is happening. So we need to wake up now, and remember that, our real struggle, begins within ourselves. And I say this honestly, you'll hear me all the time. Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Allah said in Surah Al-Ra'd, verily Allah will not change the condition of the people till they change that which is in themselves. So we have to rid ourselves of any tribalism, any racism, any ill-feeling, elitism, and also rid ourselves of inferiority complex and fear of the darkness, right? Fear of the future, and really submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
This probably is something that all of us as communities can learn from, we can benefit from. And I do thank everyone for participating in this discussion. I thank my three guests, Dr. Don Austin, Sheikh Abdul Hakim Quick, and Imam Shadid Muhammad for giving me their time. And I also thank all of you for watching. And hopefully this does bring about a bigger sense of responsibility of having these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable to have. Hopefully, inshallah, people can benefit from them. I thank you all for watching. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I'm looking back on my old life. I'm giving thanks to the Most High. Cause I could have been anything, dead or in jail or addicted to heroin. Cause this world is a scary place where they teach us how to hate the people that we don't know, but they don't know that we all came from one soul. Okay, I'm not what they show, a terrorist, nor am I a criminal. You can blame a scapegoat, but I pray for peace and not war. I said I'm not what they show, a terrorist, nor am I a criminal. You can blame a scapegoat, but I pray for peace and not war. Rise up, I'm gonna make a difference. Take back what's mine. Give power to the people. Some dreams never die. Can I get a witness? You know that it's right. 'Cause we gotta rise up and teach the world to unite.